Have you ever wondered what true freedom really means, not just for humans, but for beings that exist beyond our comprehension? We often think of freedom in human terms, the ability to make choices independent of any higher authority. But what if that same freedom, when applied to celestial beings, isn't as simple as we think? There's a deeper question at play here, and the answer might just shift everything we know about the relationship between free will, obedience, and the divine. Before we go deeper, let me ask you this: how far does your understanding of true freedom stretch? Stick with me, and by the end of this video, you'll have a much clearer picture. If you're enjoying this journey so far, hit the like button, subscribe for more content like this, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always interesting to see how far our community reaches. The concept of angels has captivated the human imagination for millennia, and across various religious traditions, these beings occupy a unique role that intersects divine will and free will in profound ways. In Christianity, angels are seen as messengers of God, often delivering His word to prophets or acting as agents of His will. For instance, the Archangel Gabriel's announcement to Mary about the birth of Jesus exemplifies the angelic role of communicating divine messages, Luke 1:26-38. These angels, though powerful and majestic, are always depicted as servants of God, existing to carry out His directives without question. Their actions, while seemingly autonomous in nature, are framed within a divine purpose that underscores their role as instruments of God's will. In Islam, angels share a similar function as divine agents, yet their nature is emphasized as beings entirely without free will. They are created by Allah to carry out His commands without deviation, offering no room for personal choice or rebellion. The Quran, in Surah 66:6, speaks to their unwavering obedience, highlighting that they do not disobey God in what He commands them, but do what they are commanded. This absolute submission to divine will is a key feature of Islamic angelology, presenting a contrast to the Christian understanding, where angels are still considered to have some measure of interaction with free will, particularly when choosing to deliver messages or act in ways that align with God's overall plan. The Jewish perspective on angels shares similarities with both Christianity and Islam, positioning angels as messengers and servants of God. In the Hebrew Bible, angels appear in significant moments of divine intervention, such as when the angel of the Lord stopped Abraham from sacrificing his son, Isaac. Genesis 22:11-12. However, much like in Islam, Jewish tradition often portrays angels as having a singular purpose, to act according to God's divine will, rather than acting autonomously. Their role is to serve as instruments in the fulfillment of God's plan, and this limitation to their autonomy brings into question the true extent of their free will. Thus, the role of angels across these religious traditions emphasizes a significant tension. If angels are created beings designed to carry out God's will, to what extent can they truly be said to possess free will? Are they simply tools of divine agency, or do they have the capacity to choose within the framework of divine expectation? The biblical example of Lucifer, once a high-ranking angel who chose to rebel against God's will, opens up a deeper theological dilemma. It suggests that angels, despite their created nature, may have the capacity for rebellion, a choice that directly challenges the notion of angels as mere extensions of divine will. In the grand tapestry of creation, free will stands as one of the most sacred and complex gifts given by God, not only to humans, but to angels as well. Theologically, free will is understood as the ability to make choices that are not determined by external forces or predestination. It's the very essence of what makes beings rational and capable of moral agency. In the context of angels, free will serves as a test of loyalty, faith, and obedience to the divine plan. While it's true that angels are created to serve God's will, Their capacity to choose between good and evil presents a fascinating theological paradox. The story of Lucifer, once the most revered of all angels, exemplifies this delicate balance. Lucifer's fall from grace didn't occur because God willed it, but because Lucifer chose of his own volition to rebel against God. His decision to embrace pride and self-interest over obedience to God is a clear demonstration of free will in action. This rebellion was not a random act, it was a conscious decision driven by Lucifer's desire to usurp God's authority. His fall shows that angels, like humans, possess the ability to choose, but those choices are not without consequence. The loss of Lucifer and his followers highlights the severe ramifications of turning away from divine will. Free will in angels, therefore, cannot simply be dismissed as a theoretical concept. It is part of the divine test set before them. If angels were merely programmed to obey, their loyalty and devotion would be meaningless. It is the possibility of rebellion that makes their choice to serve God meaningful. The free will bestowed upon them is not about choosing between good and evil in the same way that humans might, but about the choice to remain in perfect harmony with the divine purpose. This kind of divine testing serves a purpose beyond simple obedience. It is about love, loyalty, and devotion, all of which can only be fully realized when there is a real possibility of choosing otherwise. This concept is further deepened when considering the theological idea that free will is a way for God to allow his creation to demonstrate moral virtue. Just as humans are called to choose good over evil, angels too are given the opportunity to reflect their commitment to God's will through their choices. Their free will becomes an essential part of their role within the divine order. It is not simply about whether they can choose to disobey, but whether they choose to align themselves fully with God, despite their ability to act otherwise. In light of all this, we see that free will in angels is both a divine blessing and a divine challenge. It sets them apart as beings who are capable of demonstrating deep, personal devotion to God. The tragic fall of Lucifer serves as a reminder of the cost of misusing this gift. It serves as a theological warning that free will, even in the realm of the divine, must be exercised with wisdom and humility. When we think about angels, there's often a sense of inevitability attached to their actions. These beings, as messengers and servants of God, seem to be locked into a divinely preordained role that leaves little room for personal freedom. This concept stems from the belief that the will of God is absolute and that everything, including the actions of angels, must conform to his plan. In this view, angels do not possess free will in the same sense that humans do. Instead, they are perfectly obedient instruments of the divine will. Their existence, purpose, and actions seem to be marked by an unbreakable necessity to fulfill the Creator's commands. Theologically, this perspective relies heavily on a deterministic view of the universe. In this framework, everything in creation, from the grandest celestial beings to the smallest particles of matter, is part of a divine order that cannot be altered. Angels, as part of this order, are seen as beings whose very nature is to obey and serve. They are created to fulfill a specific role, such as delivering messages, guarding the faithful, or executing God's judgments without deviation. Their service to God is not just a choice, but an inevitable aspect of their existence, woven into the fabric of creation itself. This raises a compelling question. If angels are created for this singular purpose, can they truly be considered free in any meaningful sense? If their actions are always aligned with God's will, and if their disobedience is inconceivable due to their inherent nature, does that imply they lack free will? In a way, their obedience becomes automatic, a natural part of who they are. This understanding challenges our traditional concept of freedom, as their devotion to God's plan appears not as a choice, but as an unchangeable fact of their existence. We can look to biblical examples to explore this further. Consider the angels who guard the Garden of Eden, ensuring that Adam and Eve cannot return after their expulsion. Genesis 3:24. These angels are not just doing their job, they are following God's directive without question, fulfilling their role with unwavering precision. Similarly, in the book of Revelation, angels are depicted as executing God's judgments during the final battle between good and evil. Their actions, although seemingly part of a great cosmic struggle, are ultimately expressions of God's will, and their autonomy appears to be limited to carrying out the divine decree. The idea of inevitable obedience also opens up a more profound theological discussion about the nature of freedom itself. If we define freedom as the ability to choose between multiple alternatives, then angels might not experience true freedom in the way humans do. However, it could be argued that their complete devotion to the divine will is the highest form of freedom, the freedom to be in perfect harmony with God's purpose, without the conflict that arises from human choices. This raises the question, is it possible that true freedom in the divine sense is not about choosing one's own path, but about aligning fully with the divine, a plan without hesitation or rebellion? The question of free will, especially when it comes to spiritual beings like angels, has long been a subject of intense philosophical debate. Thinkers throughout history, particularly those of the medieval and scholastic traditions, have grappled with whether angels possess free will or if their actions are governed strictly by divine will. Two of the most influential philosophers on this subject, Augustine of Hippo and Thomas Aquinas, offer insights that shed light on this issue and deepen our understanding of the theological and metaphysical implications. Augustine, in his writings, often pointed to the idea that free will is a gift from God, given to all rational creatures. However, he also emphasized that the exercise of this freedom is contingent upon one's alignment with God's will. For Augustine, the ability to choose freely is not meant to be used in rebellion, but in obedience to God's higher purpose. Angels, as rational beings, would thus have the capacity for free will, but their will is naturally inclined toward the divine will. Augustine argues that even if angels possess freedom of choice, they would exercise it in harmony with God's plan, because their nature is inextricably tied to that plan. Thomas Aquinas, building upon Augustine's ideas, delves further into the nature of angelic freedom. Aquinas agrees that angels have the capacity for free will, but he believes their choices are shaped by their understanding of the divine order. In his Summa Theologica, he explains that angels, being purely spiritual beings, have a greater and more direct understanding of God's will than humans. Therefore, while they can choose, their understanding of God's perfect goodness makes their choices inherently aligned with His will. In this way, their freedom might be understood not as the freedom to choose between good and evil, but the freedom to choose perfectly within the context of divine goodness. But how does this align with the theological notion of rebellion? If angels are inherently good and aligned with the divine plan, what about instances like the fall of Lucifer, the archangel who chose to rebel against God? Here we encounter an interesting paradox. If angels have free will, as Augustine and Aquinas suggest, then Lucifer's rebellion serves as a testament to the reality of that freedom. Lucifer's choice to defy God demonstrates that even beings with perfect knowledge and understanding of God's will can exercise free will in opposition to it. This raises further questions. How can a being of such high spiritual nature choose to turn away from God? And if angels are capable of such rebellion, does this imply that their freedom is more complex than simply obeying God's will? Philosophically, this suggests that free will, at least for angels, may not be the kind of freedom we typically understand. It is not the freedom to choose between good and evil in the way humans do, but rather a higher form of freedom, the freedom to choose the good with perfect clarity and understanding. In this sense, the rebellion of Lucifer becomes a profound philosophical and theological question. Does true freedom lie in the perfect alignment with the divine will, or does it involve the ability to choose against it, even at the cost of eternal consequences? The answers to these questions depend on how we define freedom in the divine context, and whether we see the actions of angels as models of the highest form of free will, or as a more deterministic fulfillment of God's unalterable plan. As we reflect on the freedom of angels, it becomes evident that their will is not independent in the way we often think of free will. While angels do have the capacity to choose, their choices are deeply tied to the divine will, and their freedom seems to exist in perfect alignment with God's plan. The fall of Lucifer demonstrates the consequences of misusing this freedom, not as a random act, but a rejection of God's purpose. Ultimately, the freedom of angels is less about autonomy and more about obedience. Their freedom is a metaphor for perfect alignment with God's will, a submission to divine order. Just as angels reflect God's holiness, we too are called to align our choices with the divine, using our free will responsibly and in service of a higher purpose. If this insight has sparked something in you, like, subscribe, and share this video with others who need to hear this message. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me what country you're watching from. Let's keep this conversation going.